We're witnessing something that should alarm every thinking American right now. Over 100 Chinese naval and Coast Guard vessels have deployed across East Asian waters, from the Yellow Sea down through the East China Sea and into the South China Sea. This isn't just another military exercise. This represents the largest maritime show of force China has ever staged, and it's happening at a moment of profound diplomatic crisis between Beijing, Tokyo, and Taipei. Think about what this means. Japan's prime minister recently stated that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt a military response from Japan. Taiwan just announced $40 billion in additional defense spending. And China's response? A coordinated naval surge that practices access denial operations, simulated attacks designed to prevent American and allied forces from reinforcing Taiwan in a crisis. China is moving beyond episodic displays of force to a persistent multi-theater maritime presence. Their newest carrier, the Fujian, is now operational. They're deploying Type 055 cruisers with advanced air defense systems, building amphibious assault ships larger than anything America fields. This isn't preparation for some distant future conflict. This is capability building happening in real time right now, while most Americans aren't paying attention. We need to understand what's actually driving these tensions, and more importantly, whether there's still a diplomatic path forward before miscalculation leads us somewhere nobody wants to go. Let me step back and tell you what's really going on here, because the headlines about Chinese naval deployments only tell you part of the story. What we're watching unfold in East Asian waters right now is the culmination of decades of contradictory American policy, mixed signals, and a fundamental misunderstanding of how diplomacy actually works. And I need to be blunt with you. We're sleepwalking toward a crisis that could reshape the entire global order, and most Americans have no idea it's happening. Here's what you need to understand about the current situation. Since Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te, was inaugurated in May 2024, tensions have continued to escalate, with stronger rhetoric from all sides, increased American arms sales, and most troubling of all, China conducting significant naval and aerial military activities around Taiwan without any prior announcement. We're not talking about routine patrols anymore. In January of this year, Chinese jets crossed the center line of the Taiwan Strait 248 times, compared with just 72 times in January 2024. That's more than a threefold increase in just 12 months. Think about what that means in practical terms. Chinese military aircraft are now routinely operating in airspace that was once considered an informal boundary, an unspoken line that both sides respected to avoid accidents and miscalculation. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. Chinese Navy ships entered Taiwan's 24 nautical mile contiguous zone for the first time during military exercises in April. These aren't just symbolic gestures. These are deliberate probes, testing responses, establishing new operational patterns. And every time China takes one of these steps without triggering a major crisis, it becomes the new normal. The boundaries are shifting incrementally but relentlessly, and we're watching the erosion of the status quo happen in real time. Now, I want you to understand something crucial about how we got here, because the American media tends to present this as if China just suddenly decided to become aggressive. That's not what happened. Go back to 1979. The Jimmy Carter administration severed diplomatic relations with Taiwan and established formal diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, recognizing Beijing as the sole legal government of China. At the same time, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which committed the United States to providing defensive weapons to Taiwan while maintaining what we call strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying whether we would defend Taiwan militarily if China attacked. This was the compromise that allowed us to normalize relations with China while continuing our relationship with Taiwan. For decades, this arrangement worked reasonably well. It wasn't perfect, but it provided stability. China could pursue peaceful reunification as a long-term goal, Taiwan could maintain its de facto independence, and the United States could have productive relations with both sides. The key was that everyone understood the rules of the game and stuck to them. But over the past several years, that careful equilibrium has been systematically dismantled. And I need to tell you, it's been dismantled primarily by American actions, not Chinese ones. Consider what's happened recently. The United States State Department removed language stating that it does not support Taiwanese independence from its website, and a recent G7 statement omitted the typical iteration of support for a one China policy. These might seem like minor bureaucratic changes, but in diplomacy, words matter enormously. Beijing reads these signals as Washington backing away from its 40-plus-year commitment to the One China policy. Then you add Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in 2022, the Taiwan Travel Act encouraging high-level visits between American and Taiwanese officials, and the massive increase in arms sales. Congress passed an $8.12 billion aid package to Taiwan in 2024, and you start to understand why Chinese leaders believe the United States is fundamentally changing its Taiwan policy. Now, here's where I need to challenge the conventional narrative you hear in Washington. The American foreign policy establishment will tell you that we're defending democracy, that we're standing up to Chinese aggression, that we have a moral obligation to protect Taiwan. And look, I understand that appeal. Taiwan is a vibrant democracy with 23 million people who have built a remarkable society. I respect that enormously. But we need to ask ourselves a hard question. Are our current policies actually making Taiwan safer, or are they making war more likely? Think about it this way. Every time we send another weapons package to Taiwan, every time a senior American official visits Taipei in defiance of Chinese warnings, every time we conduct freedom of navigation operations through the Taiwan Strait, we're telling ourselves we're deterring Chinese aggression. But deterrence only works if the other side believes you'll actually follow through on your threats and if they believe backing down won't cost them more than fighting would. Beijing has made clear that it considers Taiwan a red line in the context of China-U.S. relations, the core of China's core interests. The Chinese Communist Party has staked its legitimacy on eventual reunification. No Chinese leader can back down on Taiwan without risking their political survival. So what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? Admiral Samuel Paparo, commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, testified that there has been a 300% annual increase in Chinese military pressure against Taiwan, and the People's Liberation Army is working to meet President Xi Jinping's 2027 military readiness goal of being capable of taking Taiwan by force. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth warned that a Chinese military attack against Taiwan could be imminent at this year's Shangri-La dialogue. We have both sides preparing for war while simultaneously hoping to avoid it. That's an incredibly dangerous dynamic. And here's what worries me most: the risk of miscalculation. Chinese Coast Guard ships arrested the crew of a Taiwan-flagged vessel near Kinmen in 2024. These are exactly the types of incidents that could spark a wider conflict. You get a confrontation at sea, someone makes a decision in the heat of the moment, shots are fired, and suddenly both sides are locked into an escalation spiral that nobody wanted, but nobody knows how to stop. We've seen this pattern throughout history. World War I didn't start because anyone wanted a world war. It started because of rigid alliance systems, predetermined military plans, and a series of escalatory steps that leaders felt they couldn't back away from without appearing weak. Let me tell you what I think the path forward should look like, because I genuinely believe there's still time to step back from this precipice. The United States needs to return to the One China policy as it was originally conceived and practiced. That means acknowledging that Taiwan is part of China, while insisting that any reunification must be peaceful and have the consent of the Taiwanese people. It means stopping the drift toward treating Taiwan as if it were an independent country. It means ending the arms sales that only fuel the arms race and make both sides more trigger happy. It means using our diplomatic leverage to encourage dialogue between Beijing and Taipei rather than inserting ourselves into what is fundamentally an internal Chinese matter. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this sounds like abandoning Taiwan, like appeasing China, like weakness. But let me ask you this. What's the alternative? Do we really want to fight a war with China over Taiwan? Because that's what we're setting ourselves up for. If Taiwan declared formal independence, or if the United States took preemptive actions that Beijing saw as making future reunification impossible, China would almost certainly use force. And a war between the United States and China wouldn't be like our recent conflicts in the Middle East. We're talking about two nuclear-armed superpowers with massive conventional militaries fighting in one of the most economically vital regions on Earth. The casualties would be in the hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. Global trade would collapse. The risk of nuclear escalation would be real. This isn't hypothetical. These are the stakes we're playing with. The tragedy here is that this crisis is entirely avoidable. China has consistently said it prefers peaceful reunification. Taiwan's population, despite supporting continued autonomy, with about a quarter wanting independence now or in the future, hasn't made any moves toward formal independence that would force China's hand. The problem is American policy, which keeps pushing the boundaries, testing Chinese tolerance, and treating this as a great power competition that we have to win rather than a complex political situation that requires patience, diplomacy, and respect for China's core interests. I've spent my entire career studying how nations interact, how conflicts develop, and how they can be resolved. What I see right now in the Taiwan Strait is a textbook example of how not to conduct foreign policy. We're letting our desire to maintain global hegemony override our common sense. We're prioritizing military solutions over diplomatic ones. We're treating China as an adversary that must be contained rather than as a partner we need to coexist with on a shared planet. And the people who will pay the price for these mistakes aren't the policymakers in Washington making these decisions. It's ordinary people in Taiwan, in China, in the United States, and around the world who will suffer the consequences if this situation spirals into armed conflict. So as you watch these naval deployments, as you read the headlines about rising tensions and military buildups, I want you to ask yourself, are we being told the whole story? Are the policies we're pursuing actually making us safer? And most importantly, is there another path, one based on diplomacy, mutual respect, and acknowledging the legitimate security concerns of all parties that could give us the peace and stability we all want? Because I believe that path exists, but we're running out of time to take it.